You're being incredibly selfish, Dad. After everything we've done to keep you included in this family, this is how you repay us. By hoarding a pile of cash you'll never even live to spend." Those words from my son Chris hit harder than the humid Georgia heat clinging to the pavement outside. We were standing in my kitchen, a space that usually smelled of freshly ground coffee and old wood, but today it felt like a courtroom. The pot roast I'd spent all afternoon slow cooking his favorite since he was 10 sat forgotten on the counter, the steam rising like a ghost between us. Chris stood there, his face flushed with a self-righteous anger that made him look like a total stranger. Behind him, his wife Chloe leaned against the marble island, her designer handbag a gift from me last Christmas, swinging provocatively from her shoulder. "I'm selfish," I asked, my voice steady despite the sudden sharp tremor in my chest. I set down the carving knife with a deliberate slowness, my knuckles white. "Because I won't give you $20,000 for a lake house when I've already given you $63,000 over the last few years." "Chris, look at the ledger of your life. I have been your primary investor, and I haven't seen a single dividend of respect in a decade." "Naiyong, it's an investment property, Harrison," Chloe snapped, dropping the dad title she usually used when she was fishing for a wire transfer. She checked her manicure, her tone dripping with disdain. "We need the down payment by Friday to lock in the interest rate. You're sitting on Sarah's life insurance in this massive 4-bedroom house. What are you even saving it for? You're 70. You can't take it with you to the grave, and we are the ones struggling to build a legacy for your grandkids. It's practically our money anyway. We're just asking for an advance." "I told you, Chris," I replied, looking my son in the eye, searching for a glimmer of the boy I used to take fishing. "My property taxes jumped 20% this year, and I have a knee surgery scheduled for next month. I need my liquid savings. I am not a bottomless well." Chris rolled his eyes, a gesture that took me back to his rebellious teenage years. But now it felt sinister, fueled by a dangerous cocktail of greed and entitlement. "The surgery is elective, Dad. You can walk just fine. You're choosing a minor procedure over Ethan and Leo's future equity. If this is how it's going to be, don't expect us to bring the boys over this weekend. We need to be around people who actually support our family's growth, not someone who clings to his gold like a dragon in a cave." They walked out the heavy oak door, slamming so hard. The framed photos of Chris's graduation and my wedding to Sarah rattled on the wall. I stood in the silence of my home, looking at the 3 plates I'd set for dinner. The table looked ridiculous, a shrine to a family that no longer existed. For the first time in my life, the silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like a declaration of war. I didn't cry. I walked over to my desk, opened my yellow legal pad, and began to write. To understand how my son became a man who could threaten to withhold his children for cash, you have to understand the man I was. I was a structural engineer, a man of blueprints, load-bearing walls, and rigid integrity. I believed a father's primary job was to build a fortress. When my wife Sarah passed away 5 years ago from a sudden illness, she left me with a debt-free home in the Atlanta suburbs and a comfortable nest egg we had spent 40 years building. "Take care of Chris," she'd whispered in those final hours. I took those words as a holy command, a final mission to protect the only piece of her I had left. At first, the help was innocent, almost noble. When Ethan was born, Chris and Chloe complained that their old sedan wasn't safe enough for a car seat. They showed me crash test ratings and spoke about precious cargo. I didn't hesitate. I put down $15,000 for a Volvo SUV. I remember the joy of seeing them drive off in a safe vehicle, thinking Sarah would be proud of me for being the provider she expected. Then came the emergency credit card debt from their honeymoon that they just couldn't get ahead of. "The interest is killing us, Dad," Chris had said over a beer. Another $10,000. I did it happily, convinced that I was clearing the path for their success. I thought I was laying the foundation. I didn't realize I was just building a taller pedestal for their arrogance. Chloe grew up in a family where money was a weapon of control, and she learned to navigate that world early. She was a master of the soft sell. She would send me videos of the boys playing in their cramped backyard, followed by a sigh about how it's a shame they don't have a safe place to run like they do at your house. Every lunch she invited me to, which I initially thought was out of love, ended with me pulling out my credit card while she searched for her wallet, always apologizing with a smile that never reached her eyes. I remember a rainy Tuesday 2 years ago when Chloe called me sobbing because their HVAC unit had blown out. I didn't even ask for a quote. I wired $5,000 instantly. 3 days later, I saw a post on her private Instagram, which she forgot I followed, showing Chris unboxing a $3,000 set of custom golf clubs. I felt a pinch of doubt, a small voice telling me I was being played, but I silenced it. I told myself that young couples make mistakes, and that my role was to be their safety net. I didn't realize that a safety net without boundaries eventually becomes a doormat. The disrespect didn't start with the lake house. It was a slow, agonizing erosion like water wearing down a stone. It was the way Chloe would walk into my house and immediately begin rearranging my pantry, sighing about how dated my tastes were and how I was living in the past. It was the way Chris stopped asking how my heart medication was working and started asking how my Vanguard portfolio was performing in the current market. I had become a line item in their budget and emergency fund, with white hair and a kind smile. Last Thanksgiving was the turning point I chose to ignore, out of a desperate need for family harmony. I had spent 3 days preparing the traditional meal, Sarah's favorite oyster stuffing the turkey, and 4 types of pie. Chris and Chloe arrived 2 hours late, their faces buried in their phones. Chloe didn't even take off her coat before she started criticizing the old house smell that she claimed was bad for the boys' allergies. "You know, Harrison," she said, during dinner, picking at the green bean casserole I'd made from scratch, "this house is a lot of upkeep for one person. We were looking at this luxury senior living community near the new mall. You'd have a lovely 1-bedroom, and we could manage the sale of this property for you. It would free up so much capital that's just rotting here. You could see the boys more often if you lived closer to us." I looked at Chris, expecting him to defend my right to live in the home where I'd raised him and cared for his mother. Instead, he just nodded his mouth full of turkey. "Yeah, Dad. It makes sense. You wouldn't have to worry about the lawn or the gutters. We'd handle all the heavy lifting. It's time to pass the torch, don't you think?" The heavy lifting they meant was moving my money into their accounts. When I told them I wasn't ready to leave my home, the atmosphere turned arctic. Chris didn't help clear the table. Chloe spent the rest of the evening showing the boys videos on her phone so they wouldn't have to talk to me. They left before I could even serve the pie. I sat on the porch that night watching the Georgia fireflies and realized that to them, I was no longer a father. I was a tenant in a building they already considered their inheritance. By the time the lake house demand arrived, the grandkid tax had become my daily reality. This is a common tactic in suburban America, the silent agreement that if Grandpa doesn't pay up or provide free labor, Grandpa doesn't get to see the kids. If I didn't volunteer to babysit on an hour's notice so they could go to a wine tasting, Chloe would suddenly discover that Ethan had a packed schedule for the next month. 3 months ago, Chris asked for $8,000 for a ground floor opportunity in a cryptocurrency startup run by one of his fraternity brothers. For the first time, I pushed back. I told him it sounded like a scam and that I'd seen too many men lose their shirts on sure things. Chris didn't speak to me for 3 weeks. No Sunday dinners, no photos of the boys, nothing. Then out of the blue, Chloe called me in tears. She said Ethan had developed a concerning cough, and they couldn't afford the specialist's out-of-network copay and the testing fees. My fatherly instinct screamed over my logic. I panicked and sent the $8,000 immediately, telling them to keep me updated on every test result. The very next evening, I saw a photo posted by a mutual friend at a high-end steakhouse in Buckhead. There were Chris and Chloe clinking champagne glasses to celebrate Chris's new venture. In the background, Ethan was running around the restaurant looking perfectly healthy playing on a brand new iPad Pro. The cough had been a fiction designed to bypass my common sense. I felt a hot flash of shame not for their lie, but for my own weakness. I was funding their deceit. I was buying a seat at their table, and the price was my self-respect. I realized then that I wasn't helping my son. I was feeding a monster that would eventually consume everything Sarah and I had worked for. We returned to that Tuesday in the kitchen. "You're being selfish, Dad." As the sound of their car tires crunching on the gravel driveway faded, the fog in my mind finally lifted. The anger was cold and surgical. I didn't go back to the pot roast. I didn't cry in the dark. I walked into my home office, a room filled with my old engineering books and the smell of cedar. I pulled the filing cabinet open and took out the blue folder labeled Family Gifts. I laid every check out on the desk. $15,000 for the car. $10,000 for the debt, $5,000 for the HVAC, $8,000 for the sick child. The total was $63,400. That was the price of my inclusion. I looked at the deed to my house. It was held in the Vance Family Trust, which Sarah and I had established 20 years ago to protect our assets from taxes and probate. As the sole surviving trustee, I held every card in the deck. I remembered a bridge I had designed early in my career. It collapsed because the contractor used substandard materials to save money. I realized I had done the same with Chris. I had built his life out of my money instead of his character. I picked up the phone and called Linda, a woman who had been my attorney and friend for 30 years. "Linda, I need to make some drastic changes to the trust." I said, my voice firmer than it had been since the day of my wife's funeral. "And I need you to pull the file on the townhouse in Marietta. People often forget that I didn't just give Chris and Chloe money. I bought the townhouse they currently live in. The agreement was a rent-to-own arrangement, where they would pay a below-market rate to the trust to build their own equity. They hadn't paid a dime in 18 months, claiming hard times, while they posted photos from Aspen and Destin. I want to issue a formal notice of arrears," I told my lawyer. "They have 30 days to settle the debt to the trust or vacate the property. And Linda, I want to schedule a full mental competency evaluation for myself tomorrow. I want it on the record that I am perfectly sane before they try to claim I've lost my mind for saying no." The first move wasn't a phone call. It was a certified letter delivered by a courier. I knew that if I tried to talk to Chris, Chloe would twist my words or use the kids to guilt-trip me. I needed the law to speak for me. I spent the next week meticulously organizing every bank transfer, every text message where they begged for help, and every receipt of their luxury spending that followed my gifts. When the courier arrived at their door on Friday morning, my phone began to vibrate within minutes. I didn't answer. I sat on my porch, sipping a glass of iced tea, watching the notifications pile up like autumn leaves. "Dad, are you insane?" Chris's voice was distorted with rage on the voicemail. "A notice to quit from the trust you're trying to evict your own grandsons. What has gotten into you? Call me right now before I come over there and we settle this." 10 minutes later, Chloe sent a text that was even more calculated. "Harrison, we are deeply concerned about your mental state. This kind of lashing out isn't like you. We think the stress of being alone is finally causing a breakdown. We're coming over this afternoon to help you pack a bag for a short stay at a wellness center. Please don't fight us on this." They arrived at 4 p.m., but I wasn't the grieving, confused old man they expected. I was sitting on my front porch in a rocking chair, Linda sitting beside me with a laptop and a briefcase. I had a digital recorder sitting on the small table between us, its red light glowing like a warning beacon. "Oh, stay right there on the sidewalk," I said, as they marched up the path looking like they were ready to stage an intervention. "Dad, stop this theater." Chris set his face red. "You can't evict us. We're family. You can't sue your own blood." "I'm not suing you, Chris," I said, my voice calm and low. "The Vance Family Trust is a legal entity, and you are a tenant in breach of contract. Since you called me selfish for protecting my savings, I decided to act like the trustee your mother expected me to be. I've funded a lifestyle for you that you haven't earned. If you can't pay the rent, the trust will find a tenant who can. The money will be used to fund my selfish knee surgery and my long-term care. I will not be a burden to society because I gave my retirement to a man who doesn't respect me. You're heartless, Chloe screamed. Where are we supposed to go? Think of the boys. You wanted a lake house so badly, I replied. Maybe you can find one with a very low security deposit. You have 30 days. Use them wisely. They didn't go quietly into the night. Chloe decided to use the only weapon she had left: reputation. She began calling my friends from the country club and my brothers in Chicago, spinning a tale of a lonely man who had lost his grip on reality and was bankrupting his children out of spite. She even posted a vague message on Facebook about supporting family through the darkness of dementia. For a few days, I felt the sting of isolation. A few friends stopped calling. My own brother sent me a cautious email asking if I needed to see a specialist. But Chloe underestimated one thing: I am an engineer. I keep records of everything. I didn't engage in a shouting match on social media. Instead, I sent a BCC email to my entire contact list, family, friends, and the elders of our church. I didn't include any insults. I simply attached a PDF. The first page was the results of my competency exam, signed by 2 independent doctors. The following pages were a simple spreadsheet titled Family Support 2018 to 2024. It showed the $63,400 in gifts, the $24,000 in unpaid rent, and the screenshots of their luxury vacations taken days after claiming they couldn't afford Ethan's medical bills. I ended the email with a short note: I love my son, but I will no longer participate in the lie that family means financial exploitation. I am choosing to spend my remaining years in peace, surrounded by the truth. The silence from their end was deafening. The dementia narrative vanished overnight. Chris tried to confront me at the supermarket later that week, cornering me in the frozen food aisle. You embarrassed us, Dad. Everyone is talking. Do you know how hard it is for me to show my face at work? My boss saw that email. Then maybe you should work harder at your job than you do at managing my bank account, I said, pushing my cart past him. If you're embarrassed by the truth, Chris, that's not my problem. That's your conscience finally waking up. The most agonizing part of the justice I was seeking was the collateral damage. Chloe, realizing the legal and social routes were blocked, turned to the boys. She began using Ethan and Leo as emotional bargaining chips. She sent me a video of Ethan crying because he missed Grandpa's workshop and asking why I was making them move to a small house. It was a knife to the heart. I sat in my leather armchair, clutching my phone, my eyes burning with tears. Part of me wanted to pick up the phone wire, the $20,000, and tell them to come home. I wanted to hear the boys' laughter in the hallway again. But then I remembered the iPad Pro at the steakhouse. I remembered the cough that never existed. If I gave in now, I wasn't just losing my money. I was losing the boys. I was teaching them that love is a transaction. I was teaching them that Grandpa is a person you can squeeze until he bleeds. I recorded a video back, but I didn't send it to Chloe. I sent it directly to Chris. Ethan, Leo, I said into the camera, my voice thick but firm. Grandpa loves you more than anything. I'm doing some big changes right now to make sure you have a very special college fund when you grow up. I can't wait to see you soon. Be brave and help your mom and dad pack their boxes. Then I added a message to Chris. If you ever use those children to play my heartstrings again, I will dissolve the college trusts I just mentioned and donate every penny to the local animal shelter. Do not make your children soldiers in your financial war. This is about your choices, not theirs. The videos stopped immediately. It was a cold, hollow victory, but for the first time in years, I felt like a father again, not a bank, but a father who was setting a boundary to save his son from his own greed. 30 days passed. They didn't pay the back rent they couldn't. because the money had already been spent on lifestyle inflation and bad investments. They were forced to move into a 2-bedroom rental on the far side of town. Chloe had to take a job as a dental receptionist, and Chris started picking up overtime at his firm for the first time in his career. We met at Sarah's office to sign the final dissolution of the rent-to-own agreement and update the Vance family trust. The atmosphere in the conference room was like ice. Chris looked exhausted, the designer stubble replaced by dark circles under his eyes. Chloe sat in the corner, her arms crossed, refusing to even acknowledge my presence. "Are you happy now, Harrison?" Chris asked as he signed the papers. His voice was flat, devoid of the rage he'd shown before. "We're living in a place half the size of the townhouse. The boys have to share a room. We're struggling, just like you wanted." "I never wanted you to struggle, Chris," I said, leaning across the table. "I wanted you to be honest. You're not struggling. You're living the life you can actually afford. That's called being an adult. I didn't do this to you. Your entitlement did. I am giving you the greatest gift a father can give, the necessity of hard work." I pushed a final document toward him. It was a new provision in the trust. I wasn't cutting him out of the will. I am his father, after all. But the inheritance was now tied to a restrictive clause. He would receive a modest stipend for his mortgage, but the bulk of the estate would remain in a trust for the boy's education and a large endowment for the hospice that cared for his mother. "You'll get what you need, Chris," I said. "But you will never again get what you merely want at my expense." It has been 6 months since the great audit. My knee surgery went perfectly, and I spent my recovery time in the quiet of my garden watching the hydrangeas bloom. I don't miss the noise of the grandkid tax. I see the boys every other weekend now. It's different. There are no expensive trips to the toy store or $500 birthday parties funded by Grandpa's magic card. Instead, we bake cookies. We sit on the porch, and I tell them stories about their grandfather. The real stories about hard work, the value of a man's word, and how to build things that last. Chloe remains cold, a distant figure who drops them off and picks them up without getting out of the car. That's fine. I've learned that I don't need the approval of a person who only valued me for my balance sheet. Chris is evolving. He called me last week, not to ask for money, but to tell me he'd been promoted to senior project manager. His voice sounded different, heavier, but more grounded. He thanked me for the college fund video I'd mentioned. It was the closest thing to an apology I'll ever get. And for now, it's enough. I've learned a hard lesson at 70. No is not a rejection of love. It is the ultimate act of love. When you enable someone, you are helping them destroy themselves. You turn your family into a marketplace where the highest bidder wins, and the father is just a commodity. The fortress I built with Sarah is still standing. The walls are a little different now, and the gates are much harder to open. But the foundation is finally made of stone instead of paper. I sit on my porch as the Georgia sun dips below the tree line, casting long, peaceful shadows across the grass. I am not a selfish man. I am a man who finally remembered his own value. And in this house built on truth, I am finally home.